It's 4 o'clock in Radio Cairo. This is World of Info coming live from Studio 3. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad is at the control. Stay tuned with us. We have a big surprise for you. So this is World of Info coming live from Studio 3, and we have the great pleasure and honor to have with us Ambassador Kristien Berger, or should I say Dr. Kristien Berger, the Ambassador, His Excellency the Ambassador, and the Chief of the Mission of the European Union, the head of the delegation of the European Union in Cairo. A gentleman, a very seasoned diplomat. He is originally Austrian, but he has a real European background. He served in the Austrian army and worked in the United Nations for a long time, in the legal department of the United Nations, and in the military as well, in the peacekeepers. And he has a master's degree from London School of Economics, a PhD in law from Vienna University, and has been working with the European Union since 1995, and the chief of the mission of the delegate in Jerusalem, Ankara, and now in Egypt. I think it's a very colorful career with a lot of experience, exposure, and times, and definitely a lot of interesting information to say. And there is a famous Chinese proverb that says, "May you live interesting times." And this is not a proverb, it's sort of like a curse or whatever. But it seems that we are living in interesting times, and I believe, sir, you have taken your share from interesting times during your whole service, whether this was in the Middle East or in Europe, in Brussels. You have seen a lot. And we are really appreciating your time and appreciating your kindness that you are coming here in our program to do a lot of food for thought and exchanging food for thought about the European Union. Sir, thank you very much for honoring us with your visit.
Dr. Mabrouk, thank you very much for inviting me. Great pleasure, and looking forward to our discussion.
It's a great pleasure to talk about the European Union because it's a dream that came true. And usually in politics and in economics, a lot of dreams fade away and never come true. And although the origin of Europe, whether this during Charlemagne period, where there was Germany and France were part of the empire of Charlemagne, and of course a lot of territories in between. And I think this is how the dream began, because the EU is a political and economic union that has almost all of Europe geographically, with 27 states, not 28 anymore, and 447 million people, not 510 anymore after the UK has withdrawn. And it has almost 24.6 of the nominal GDP. A dream that came true. How was that possible? If geography unites these countries, 24 languages separate them.
I think it's an important question, and I try to answer the very same question to my children very often. And you look back in European history. We had 1,000 years of war. Yes, the European dream came out of Charlemagne's empire, but the Charlemagne empire fell apart into three parts, and two of these parts, namely what later became Germany and what later became France, were at war with each other for a long time, yes, drawing in also other European countries. So in 1945, after the end of the Second World War, it was clear this couldn't continue like this. So we had a millennium of wars between European countries and European nations. I always tell my children that my grandfather, one of my grandfathers, died in the Second World War in Russia. My other grandfather was persecuted by the Nazis because he believed in the independence of our country, Austria. My parents were born in the bomb hails of the Second World War. I was born and grew up 50 kilometers from the Iron Curtain that divided Europe for many years.
Austria was occupied for some time by the Soviet army, and it's the only country that they withdrew from it peacefully.
And Finland.
And Finland, yes, of course.
Up to 1955,
yes.
And today, when you talk to children about this, or my children about this, I mean, it's like ancient history. But I think we must not forget it. That this was a very painful history, and therefore the decision in 1945, or rather only a few years later, by European politicians to bring an end to this and to unite Europe, and to unite first of all the means that you can use to wage war. That is energy and raw materials. So there's basically coal and steel. So this was the beginning of the European bit of enterprise to make sure that none of the countries could use what you need for war. So this had to be controlled by a supranational institution. So this was the beginning of the European institutions with the with the Steel and Coal Agency in 1952.
But before that, the Hague Conference was made, and it has taken a certain particular date, which is the date following the Victory Day. That's the 9th of May, not the 8th of May. And this is 1948.
Yes.
This is very critical day. I mean.
Also Robert Schuman
Yes.
Used that day, the 9th of May, to
later on
in 1950,
yes,
to present his ideas. So let's not forget, we're talking about a few years after the war.
Which is a lot of scars.
A lot of
blood has passed under the bridge.
A lot of destruction of Europe. But it shows you the vision of the politicians at that time, that and the pain they came out from, and saying this must not happen ever again.
It was a very tough labor, don't you think so?
Yes.
Tough delivery.
It was a tough delivery, but it fell on fertile ground, on fertile ground, because people were ready for it. They had enough of this. Let's not forget, it was not only the Second World War. We also had just a few years before the Second World War, the First World War, where a whole generation of Europeans died on the battlefield.
Yes, and the First World War in particular had the seeds of the Second World War were made in Versailles Treaty in 1919.
So therefore, it was very important to come up with a new idea that united the warring parties. And so the idea was, as I said, through reducing access or controlling access to the means that you need to fight a war, and that's energy and steel.
Sometimes they say that if not for the presence of mega characters like Konrad Adenauer and de Gaulle, the European Union would have stayed as a dream and could have changed to a nightmare. De Gaulle stayed as a prisoner of war for 3 years, from 1915 to 1918 in World War I. And Konrad Adenauer has seen the suffrage as a Nazi-prosecuted guy. So do you think that some characters like Schuman and de Gaulle and Konrad Adenauer really have changed the fate of the EU?
Yes, of course. You need leadership. You need people who come with a vision, who can take things forward. And I think the ones you mentioned, but also Kohl later on and Mitterrand, were two leaders that really united Europe and could bridge the gap. I mean, there's this famous picture of Kohl and Mitterrand holding hands on the 7th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War. I mean, who would have thought that this would happen? But these two men managed to do this and really close this gap between France and Germany.
And do you think also that the Élysée Treaty of 1964 was one of the treaties that could have really paved the way for reducing the animosity and making it a true brotherhood and friendship?
Absolutely. I mean, those countries are very close. No? They have, at government level, at people's level.
Up to the Director General of any department.
They work extremely closely together on foreign policy issues, but also on internal European. And they were, France and Germany has always been portrayed as the engine, the driving engine of European integration.
So this keeps us on a track. I mean, the same thing is, Europe has been the site of two world wars, the first half of the 20th century. It was possible to start the dream at the first period of 1945 to 57. You said that the people were extremely scarred and they didn't want to repeat the same experience that they had with 1919 Versailles Treaty. So could have really this have happened that easy or that smooth? Or it took us a lot of time till we reached 2007 with the Maastricht Treaty, with Lisbon.
I think it's a steady development. It started with an idea, but as Schuman himself, he says in the declaration, this is a progress. This doesn't come overnight. It has to be taken step by step, and the vision must come out of what you experience every day. I think this is exactly what it is. So there's a steady integration, as we call it, an ever closer union, an ever closer integration of the European countries and peoples.
What were the most common obstacles in the start?
Well, it's the old story. It's you have to balance between the thought of integration to be one European entity versus the sovereignty of individual countries and the nations. So you had a number of situations where the politicians and particularly politicians with a very strong vision what to do in the view of many went too far. So things were stopped. For example, the military integration.
Yes.
In the 50s, the military union of Europe did not work. I mean, now we are back to this, and now we are discussing this again. But in the 50s, it didn't work. So there were different themes, different topics that was easy. For example, economic integration was very easy. Or later on, the creation of this was basically the Treaty of Rome, the creation of a European Court of Justice.
Yes.
To have one court that is an instance where all other European courts could refer to. Didn't exist before, but it was possible. As the military integration was not possible, or a common currency was not possible in the early years, but it became possible with the Maastricht Treaty. So there are different steps, and you need to find the right answer at the right time.
But of course, when we talk about the military, 21 members of the state of the EU are NATO members, and 6 are in the neutral side. Of course, 2 of them have applied lately. A few weeks back, that's Sweden and Finland, for application for a full membership in NATO. So this idea of defense thing, is it really important to inflict, or you keep things as neutral, a country neutral as if it wants or whatever?
Well, I come from a neutral country,
yes.
So I've lived all my life with the concept of neutrality, and this was for us a very important identification factor of the country after 1940 and then 1955 when Austria declared neutrality. It is important, but it's military neutrality in the sense that you don't take part in wars and you don't have foreign military troops on your territory. But it doesn't mean that neutrality doesn't mean that you're neutral in
politics,
in value
or
in politics. You have a clear view on what things to do. And we also have in the European Union a solidarity clause. So in the Treaty of the European Union, when one European country is being threatened or attacked, the other European countries will support that country.
Even if this country is neutral, or even if this country is not a member of NATO?
No, because there are two different things. You have membership in NATO on the one hand, so this is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and then you have the solidarity clause in the Treaty of the European Union, which is for the 27 countries. Of course, there's an overlap, as you said. 21 countries are members of NATO, and 6 at the moment are not. But it has never been an issue. There's a close cooperation between the European Union and NATO on many things, on crisis management, on natural disasters, on civilian measures to be taken.
But not in maneuvers or whatever? Or
no, because
like
the EU doesn't have an army as such.
Yes.
Or not yet. I mean, there have always been ideas to create one, but there isn't yet. We have a close military cooperation now. We have now new instruments, for example, development of research, development of new arms, development of new concepts, and so on. There is a sort of an attempt to have a closer integration of the various military structures in Europe, which is also funded by the European Union. We also have European troops in peacekeeping operations.
Yes.
We have European missions. We have a big European mission, for example, in Mali. We have a European mission in Kosovo. We have these are not UN missions; these are European missions. So we have a European military staff in Brussels. Actually, an Austrian general is taking over, or has just taken over the European military staff in Brussels. So there are plenty of instruments there, but it's not yet what people would call the European army.
So. The euro problem has been always a problem. I mean, the economics have been always sort of an obstacle. For example, like the crisis that Greece had in economics, and the amount of money that has been pushed into the Greek economy, and how it had a sort of turbulence with the things that didn't go in the right direction or in the right way, and how this thing was solved, or this problem was solved, which was, of course, a big burden on the European Union and on countries like Germany and France, who were the main economic supporters of the EU, to find themselves facing a certain situation to save or to bail out a government that has made some mistakes. So united we stay in times of threat and in times of economic troubles. Was that possible, or what measures will you take in the future so that these things don't happen again?
Well, look where we are almost, what is it now, 12 years or more, almost 14 years later.
Yes.
Greece paid back all its loans to the IMF just a few weeks ago.
Of course.
So it was successful. It was a successful operation. Okay, there were many people felt there was a high cost to that, but it was important because it kept the Eurozone intact. Greece did not drop out of the Eurozone. I think this was a very important result of it. And we kept as much as possible the stability pact of the euro, and countries complied with it. So it was. And it showed also the level of solidarity that European countries were giving to other countries that had serious problems. And it's not only in the economic side. I mean, there's also the latest crisis was obviously the Corona crisis, where there was a lot of solidarity as well. I think this makes the European Union. Yes, there's a lot of internal debate and how this should be done and how to pay for it and things. I mean, it's like when you have a big family, there's always
of course, big family of 27.
Yes.
But the problem, if we talk about leave the problem of economics, we also take the problem of foreign policy, because in the beginning or the aim is that most of the countries of Europe or the members of the European Union will almost have sort of senses on the foreign policy, but certain countries will have different points of action. For example, Hungary, as a country that has its own special situation, its own special conditions, and a lot of scars from the history, a lot of part of the Hungary has been lost in different periods, whether this was in World War I or in World War II, and a lot of Hungarians are not anymore Hungarians, and this puts a burden on the foreign policy of the European Union. I've taken, of course, Hungary as an example. It's not just one country to talk about. So how can the European Union solve the internal problems so that it doesn't overflow on the external foreign policy of the EU?
I mean, there's a close link between internal policy areas and external policy areas. No? So we try, of course, to be consistent in what we say and what we do. So there's a link between the two, obviously. When you look at the history, the treaty history of the European Union, there was always a push to have more unity and more majority voting on issues. So when you look at the topics and on the issues on which there is majority voting instead of unanimity or consensus, this group of topics has been growing over the years. So one of the last ones where we still don't have this majority voting is foreign and security policy. Indeed, because foreign and security policy, let's face it, is a very strong element and feature of sovereignty.
Of course.
So that's, I think, very important. And the European Union is a union of independent and sovereign countries and nations that have agreed to pool certain of the topics and certain of the issues and make the European institutions responsible for that. The biggest one is trade, for example. Foreign trade is not an issue that is dealt with by the individual countries. So foreign trade agreements are signed and negotiated and signed by the European Commission. Not by individual countries. So this is just as an example,
yes.
Where this was a sovereign decision of the 27 or whatever at the time, how many countries we had as members, to hand this over to the institutions in Brussels. On foreign policy, what happened was when the Lisbon Treaty came into force, a new position was created, the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy of the European Union. So this is an institution, or this is an office that is described and designed and defined in the Lisbon Treaty. So the High Representative, at the moment, Mr. Josep Borrell, represents the European Union in foreign and security policy matters at his level with other. But this doesn't mean that individual countries cannot have their own vote and decisions on foreign policy issues. So it is important, of course, to be coherent. And I think that's the role, for example, of the the Foreign Affairs Council, so, which meets every month, where foreign policy issues are being discussed, where issues, statements are being issued.
So almost all of the foreign ministers or foreign secretaries meet in Brussels, whether it's virtual or
yes.
on.
It was virtual during the Corona
Yes,
period,
was,
of course.
but usually they meet in Brussels.
They meet twice in Luxembourg, and then the rest of the year they meet in Brussels.
Yeah.
So the next meeting will be, and that's very important for Egypt. The next meeting will be
in COP27 or what?
No, the next meeting of the Foreign Affairs Council will be in Luxembourg on the 20th of June, and the Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry will be invited to this meeting.
So we will talk, of course, we'll give a lot of our part of our program to Egyptian-European Union relations, but before we go for a break, I would like to emphasize the role of the delegate of delegation of the EU to the Arab Republic of Egypt, or any country. It's mainly concerned, as far as I understand, into principles for the economics, cooperation, and the economic virtues, but the foreign policy remains a bit not regularly or extensively knitted, just to give the freedom for every country or state to do this, right?
Well, the role of the delegations of the European Union changed with the Lisbon Treaty. So before the Lisbon Treaty, it was not the delegation of the European Union; it was the delegation of the European Commission. So you're absolutely right. At that time, it was very much focused on trade, on development cooperation, on humanitarian cooperation, on these sort of issues, not so much on foreign policy. But ever since 2010, with the Lisbon Treaty coming into force and the External Action Service of the European Union set up, which is the diplomatic service of the European Union, it also added a strong diplomatic function to the role of the delegations. So the delegations today play a double function. So they play still the function of before Lisbon on economics, but also we represent the European Union on the ground vis-à-vis the third country as a collective. So this was not the case before, but it is now. So we play. How do I describe this? We will play in third countries what in Europe the rotating presidency is doing. So we represent, and we are the constant interlocutors and partners of the authorities in that third countries. This, of course, does not preclude that individual member states and their embassies have also a relationship with the host country. Of course not. This is, of course, this goes hand in hand. We meet regularly. We have many different coordination functions among European countries here in Egypt, like in every other country. So the heads of missions are meeting, the deputies are meeting, the political councils are meeting, the trade councils are meeting, culture, administration. So we have a very close interaction between the member states of the EU and the delegation. And here in Egypt, actually, we have 26 member states represented. There's only one that is not here, so it's a very large group of
ambassadors that you.
Yes.
Well, you're still listening to the World of Info with His Excellency Dr. Kристian Berger, Ambassador of the European Union and the head of the delegation to the Arab Republic of Egypt. And in this beautiful afternoon in Cairo, stay tuned with us. So, with World of Info. So, still listening into the World of Info with His Excellency Dr. Kристian Berger, the Ambassador and Head of Delegation of the European Union in Egypt. And we are talking about the European Union and its role. And we have to talk before we leave about the principles, about the Lisbon Treaty, which is the Treaty of Reform, because they say the EU before Lisbon and after Lisbon is something different. And I think it has really made an effort and a great effect on the European Union of today. How was this treaty influential in the state of the European Union and, of course, as making EU the main provider of one of the biggest providers of foreign aid than any other economic union, reaching 7.3% of the world population? How Lisbon Treaty helped to sort of materialize this cooperation?
Well, the history of the Lisbon Treaty is quite an interesting one, because originally it was not planned to be a treaty. It was originally, the plan was to have a constitution for the European Union, and the former French President Giscard d'Estaing, who was the president of the constitutional committee, they came up with a draft of the constitution, but it was unfortunately not accepted in two referenda in Europe, so it could not be adopted because the rule at the time was that you need to follow the legal procedures of the individual countries when it comes to the adoption or the ratification of international treaties, and of course that would have been an international treaty. So then they went back to the drawing board and decided to come up with the Lisbon Treaty, which basically contains many of the aspects of what would have been in the Constitution. Now, one important one was that the European Union was given legal personality, which was not the case before the Lisbon Treaty. So it's a body now that can contract, it's a body that can be represented, and it's a body that is now being represented by the High Representative for Foreign Security Policies at the Brussels level, and in third countries by the delegations of the European Union. So this was one of the important parts. Another one was that, as we talked about before, that many of the policy areas that in the past had to be decided unanimously by consensus can now be decided by a majority vote. So not everybody needs to agree, but the majority, obviously, both of countries and population in the European Union needs to agree to a decision. Another important aspect was also the democratization of the European Union. So the European Parliament was given a much stronger role in the Lisbon Treaty than it had before. So the European Parliament can now can decide on the European Commission, can actually even dismiss the European Commission in a vote. So it's strengthening the
control of the people,
by the people of the administration. And something else that was put in the Lisbon Treaty, which later on obviously came to haunt us, so to speak. For the first time, countries can leave the European Union. So there was an article put in the Lisbon Treaty, this famous Article 50, that allows a country to leave. And of course,
this was not put in any law before, or
no,
regulation?
it was since Lisbon. It's the first time it was put in. Yes. And then, of course, the United Kingdom took a democratic decision on the basis of a referendum to leave the European Union using that article, Article 50.
So why did the UK leave the EU?
Well, there was a debate for many, many years in the United Kingdom how useful it is to be a member of an organization or of a body that was, in the view of the British, was changing its nature from a pure economic entity to something that was also playing a political role and was a stronger political integration. So, and in the end, as I said, it was decided to hold a referendum, and the majority of the people voted for leaving.
But was it only because of political reasons or for economic reasons as well?
I mean, there was a mixture of reasons. There were also many arguments were used, which in our view were unfair to the European Union. But in the end, I mean, you have to accept it. This was a decision by the people.
So did this leave a lot of bitterness under the bridge?
No, it didn't, because it was very clear from the beginning that we have to deal with this. You know, it's not something that you can be angry about or you can bitter about.
Yes.
You have to address it in a
Emotions should not be a part of the equation.
So Mr. Michel Barnier was appointed as a negotiator for the withdrawal treatment, so for Britain to leave the European Union, and it was very clear from day one that this must not hamper or slow down the work of the European Union in other policy areas. So this was an issue that had to be dealt with, and it was dealt with in a very professional and experienced manner, and it led then to the withdrawal treaty between the European Union and the United Kingdom.
Do you think that they will come back again one day?
Difficult to predict anything. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, they had one or two referenda actually before joining the European
yes, I remember that. Yes,
at the time. So people evolve, decide differently.
Well, Britain has been always an island, and definitely the idea of an island historically and an empire definitely has made its effect on the British subject or the British conscience.
I think they have, however, remained great friends and partners. They're Europeans. I mean,
definitely,
they're part of Europe, so there's no question about this.
And I still have a lot of easiness in the borders crossing and things like that, so that the British passport will be allowed in European Union without a big issue, right? For example.
No, there's no issue. I mean, we have agreements with many countries where you can enter the European Union on the basis of such agreements. I mean, the issue that arose was mainly in the economic field, because all of a sudden we had a customs border between the European Union and the United Kingdom. So that was, in my view, the real issue, that you have to make sure that business can flow as it was before. Or they're not certain measures to be taken and procedures to be followed. So that has slowed down, of course, things. But I think the efforts on both sides are to make sure that this works frictionless.
So we have to talk about the role of EU in the foreign aid, and the Nobel Prize that has been awarded in 2012. So this, I think, has given a lot of prestige to the European Union. How was that possible, and how far is the EU foreign aid has done to improve the economy of the countries that are receiving this foreign aid? And of course, what's the benefit for the EU for that?
I mean, when you go back to 2012 and the reason why the European Union was awarded the Peace Nobel Prize, it was not. I don't think the European Union was awarded the Peace Nobel Prize because we are big peacemakers around the world. Although we try to be there and help as much as possible. I think the EU was awarded the Nobel Prize because it's a peace project in its own right. I mean, we talked about it before, coming out of the terrible wars of the 20th century and then becoming this sort of an
neutralizing effect.
Exactly, and coming to a situation where countries in Europe are no longer, at war. There is no risk of war between European nations inside the European Union. That's why I think we were given the Peace Nobel Prize, and we see a certain responsibility also. So therefore, the European Union is the biggest supporter or the biggest provider of foreign aid, development aid. We're the biggest supporter worldwide of civil society organizations, for example. We are the biggest provider of humanitarian assistance across the globe. I give you just the example of the Corona crisis. So what happened in 2020, we called an international conference to raise money because there was no vaccine at the time. So money was raised to fund research. So 16 billion euros were raised. It was not only the European Union, it was also other countries and philanthropic organizations and a number of bodies. But the sum of money was 16 billion euros, and that money was used to put into research. Once the research came up with some ideas how to fight Corona, then money was provided for pharmaceutical companies to start producing, developing the vaccine. Once that was done, we made sure that this vaccine was shared worldwide. So either by making sure that countries could buy the vaccine from pharmaceutical companies, or they were even given for free via this system that was set up in Geneva, COVAX system. So this is simply to show or to say that Europe also sees its responsibilities worldwide to assist and help and cooperate with others.
And I think there was a topic that I wanted to raise, of course, which is the COVID and the challenge of the COVID. We have seen the Spanish flu devastating Europe in the early 20th century, from 1917 till 1921 even, and one of the biggest victims of this epidemic was the Versailles Treaty, because, as you know, Woodrow Wilson, when he had this flu, there was a change in his personality, and it's written in his biography, and he obeyed Lloyd George and Clemenceau in all whatever they did, the worst thing that they did in the Versailles Treaty. So Europe has been affected by the Spanish flu before. 50 million people were lost to this Spanish flu, more than the ones that were lost in World War I. Yes. And we here faced this big disaster. Europe has learned the lesson, but still we had the borders raised and the quarantine and all these effects. How much did the EU suffer economically, with its states, and the EU as an organ itself suffered from the COVID crisis, and did we learn our lessons so next time if we face such a, may God forbid that, such a disaster, we'll be more prepared?
I think yes. We have certainly learned the lessons how to react quickly to such a crisis and to see the early signs of such a crisis. Let's not forget, COVID has come in different waves.
And still coming.
It's still coming, most likely. As people always say, after the holidays. We'll
please, after the holidays.
Yes, it's always after the holidays. Indeed, I think at the beginning there was sort of an immediate reaction. Countries had to take emergency measures. But very quickly it was understood that you are most effective if you coordinate and if you take the same measures across Europe. I start with a very simple example. You mentioned borders. Indeed, borders were closed at the very beginning of the crisis, but very quickly it was understood we need to allow the flow of trade and people. So we came up with the concept of green corridors, green lanes, to make sure that trade between countries, particularly trade that was needed to address the corona crisis, trade in masks, in equipment, in oxygen, and many of these things would flow, would not be interrupted. So first it was done within the European Union, and then very quickly also with our neighboring countries to make sure that this would not interrupt the trade. The impact on the economy was severe.
Yes.
Because many companies closed down or many companies slowed down.
Industries like tourism have stopped completely.
Exactly. I mean, there were days when I think not a single plane was in the air.
Yeah.
So aviation industry was hit hard.
They say this has improved very much the pollution.
Yes, but maybe it's a positive side of
only the positive side of
But I give you an example on aviation. I mean, in normal aviation agreements, you get certain landing rights, but you lose those landing rights if you don't use up to 80%. So if you do not fulfill that quota, then you lose your land.
Suddenly, legally, you were having a problem.
You have a problem. So, and then what was the result? So-called ghost flights. So empty flights, in order to make sure that you would not lose the landing right. But this is of course not logical.
Very illogical.
So the European Parliament passed a law, legislation to change this. So to allow airlines, to reduce their flight capacity, but not to lose the landing rights.
So this is very hard learned lessons.
Yes, right? This is just an example of many other examples. But then, I think what we saw, the impact on the economy, particularly on the small and medium-sized enterprises, like in Egypt, in Europe, those are the engines of the economy, of employment, of fund generation, of money generation. So a lot of efforts were made to make sure that people kept their jobs. So a lot of legislation was enacted that people could work part-time without losing their jobs. Financial support was given to small and medium-sized enterprises, and a big investment package was issued. The European central banks started to buy up public and private securities, 1 trillion euros. Then the European Investment Bank issued loans to small and medium-sized enterprises, so 100 million euros in a loan was set up, a loan sort of package was set up. Then support went to individual sectors of the economy. You mentioned already tourism. Of course, this was hit very hard. So we had to make sure that hotels, restaurants, coffee shops, and so on would get some support. So they would not have to shut down completely. Farming was also given support because there was also an impact on the agricultural sort of industry and transport. So a lot of money was being raised in order to support the economy. But it was not only in Europe. We also made sure that neighbors who were affected by this were also included in this package.
So we can say that if the EU did not exist, Europe would have suffered more, like it suffered in the early 20th century with the corona at that time. Right?
Most likely, because the purchase, for example, of the corona vaccine is a good example. It was decided very, very early on that this has to be done at the central level. This has to be done at the European level because it gives you more financial means to develop the vaccine. You can give more money for research and for production. You can have, of course, also a bigger deal with individual pharmaceutical companies. And it was important to make sure that all the member states of the European Union would have equal access to the vaccine.
That's very interesting. So we're still listening to the World of Info with His Excellency Dr. Kристиан Berger, the ambassador and the head of the delegation of the European Union to the Arab Republic of Egypt. And more to hear, and stay tuned with us because we are going to talk about the EU and the Egyptian relations. Still listening to the World of Info. My name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Dr. Muhammad is at the control, and we're talking with His Excellency Dr. Kристиан Berger, ambassador and the head of delegation of the European Union to Egypt. Sir, we have to talk about your job here. Because definitely, as we were talking before, we have been having a lot of relations between Europe and Egypt since Alexander the Great, 332 BC, since the Romans came, since Cleopatra, and since a lot of water. Yes, Mark Antony was the first one. I mean, Julius Caesar was the one who got an engagement with Cleopatra the Seventh, and then there was Mark Antony on the road, and then there was Octavius Caesar, who has demolished the Egyptian Greek kingdom. So there are a lot of things between Egypt and Europe ever since. But let's talk about the present, not of the past. Since when do we have a delegation of the European Union here in Egypt?
So we started about 50 years ago to reach out to the southern shores of the Mediterranean, and we started this what later on became the Euro-Mediterranean partnership, which later on, the name became Barcelona process in 95, but it started 50 years ago. And if I remember correctly, the bilateral relationship with Egypt, between Egypt and the European Union, or the European communities at the time, started 45 years ago. And then shortly after that, a delegation was opened here in Cairo, which for a long time was in Zamalek.
This was
when the scene, and now we are
in Zamalek again, or in 19 the delegation
70 must have been 72.
72.
Yeah,
That's almost 50 years now.
Yes. 72 started the relation, then 5 years later, so 77.
So from 1977, you have an ambassadorship here.
We have we have an office here. Yes.
An office led by an ambassador. Yes. That's very interesting. So you're following the footsteps of a lot of great people who have really paved the way.
Yes, but as I said, at that time, it was the delegation of the European Commission, and in 2010, it became the delegation of the European Union.
But all these times, the representative was called, or the head of the mission was called the ambassador.
He had an honorary title of ambassador, and now it's the title part of the of the treaty.
That's very good. So the Egyptian-European Union relations, it's quite different than the Egyptian-European countries' relations. Because all the embassies of Europe are represented here, except one, I think, maybe Finland or something, or Iceland. Luxembourg, yes. So tell us about that. So how far is the communication and the cooperation?
We have, when you look at it from a legal point of view or in a treaty point of view, we have two agreements really with Egypt, which is the foundation of our relationship. One is the association agreement that came into force in 2004. Which is largely a free trade agreement between the European Union and Egypt. But it's broader than that. It's also cooperation on development, on humanitarian, on financial, and on many other aspects, and on political coordination. And then we have something that is relatively new. We're now in the second sort of edition, which is called the Partnership Priorities, European Union, Egypt Partnership Priorities, where we spell out certain issues and areas we want to work on in the next period, and the period is normally 7 years. The next set of partnership priorities will be adopted on the 19th of June at the Foreign Affairs Council meeting, Association Council meeting in Luxembourg, and that will spell out the areas where we want to cooperate closely for the next 7 years. So that's the legal background. Then there is, of course, stemming from that is a very strong economic engagement between the European Union and Egypt. 25% of Egypt's foreign trade is with the European Union. I think 26 or 27% of foreign direct investment in Egypt comes from the European Union. So there's a very strong engagement, and it jumped in numbers after the agreement was on the partnership. Sorry, the association agreement was signed in 2002 and then came into force in 2004. So it's a very rich economic relationship between the EU and in Egypt. So the legal aspect is all taken care of by the European Union. But of course, behind all this, or in front of this, if you want, are the businesses, are the companies that are engaging directly from European companies with Egyptian companies, then to use the environment and the framework and the regulatory framework that the EU and Egypt agrees on to make this business happen.
And of course, we should mention also the cooperation in the field of the security and combating the illegal immigration along the borders of the Mediterranean. I think there is a big sort of cooperation in this field.
Coming back to the partnership priorities, there is a chapter on migration in the partnership priorities, and I must say this has been implemented extremely well in the last. So 2017, the previous set of the partnership priorities came into force, and there has not been an issue at all. So there are different types of migration, obviously. So there's what we call irregular migration of third country nationals. So they do not leave Egypt and go to the European Union. There's also irregular migration of Egyptians, but even that was, that there are a lot of measures in place to reduce this or to stop it. And if I'm not mistaken, since 2016 we didn't have any major incidents.
Yes.
There are also agreements between Egypt and member states of the European Union, what we call them return agreements. So if there are people who have reached Europe in a regular way, they can be then returned to Egypt. We also have an agreement, or we have a project with Egypt to enable regular migration. So people can go through programs, study languages, and then go to Europe and work in Europe. We have agreements here with projects with the IOM, with the International Labour Organization, with Germany, to do very specific projects and programs to allow people to move to the European Union in a regular fashion.
And there is a sort of support in different fields as well. For example, in tourism and things like that.
When you look at the portfolio of the programs and projects that we are running here, actually you will see almost everything. Yes. So it's in all walks of life. We have programs in all governance of Egypt. We have programs. So this is from environment and energy. These are of course the most popular topics at the moment, and very important topics also in view of preparing for COP27.
And education.
Education, we are running programs in technical vocational training, so TEVET. We are now already in the second program, so we're running this with a number of schools here, but also with the chambers of commerce and the chambers of industry that, of course, are the ones then have to employ or will employ people. So the right sort of mixture of skills are being provided in those schools. And we have also at university level, we have a close cooperation between European universities and Egyptian universities, either directly or via what we call the Erasmus program. So this is a program which is, I think, one of the most successful European programs worldwide, where we allow or we encourage, first of all, students to spend some time abroad, but also there's an exchange between between professors and teachers.
Yes.
There's research being done. We have the Horizon 20. We have the Horizon Europe program now it is called, where we bring together Egyptian and European institutes, university organizations to work together on research projects. That's funded by the European. So there's a whole range of cooperation in the educational sector.
So there's a lot of topics to discuss.
There's a lot of so I mean we have some big topics. Big topics are, as we mentioned now, it's of course environment because of COP27. It's energy because of gas supplies, because Egypt is a strong provider of a source of renewable energy, solar energy, wind energy, and of course now hydrogen is coming up. We have a close cooperation on environmental issues, as I mentioned, but also on water in particular. This is the biggest portfolio that we have here on water. This ranges from the rehabilitation of water channels, but also desalination and water treatment plants, sewage treatment plants. So there's a whole range of activities in the water sector.
Well, sir, we are running out of time, but you have to give us a promise that you come back to us.
With great pleasure.
To tell us more about the European Union, because there is a lot of things, and I believe that we're going to dedicate one episode at least about the fields of cooperation between Egypt and the European Union.
With great pleasure. It's a big portfolio that we have at the moment, and there's a lot to talk about, indeed.
Definitely. So today we had the pleasure and honor to have with us Dr. Kристиан Berger, the ambassador and the head of delegation of the European Union to Egypt, with a lot of food for thought about the European Union and how it is changed from a dream to a current affair. And my name is Dr. Amr Mabrouk. Dua Muhammad was at the control. We hope that you will join us back again to Radio Cairo next week, same time, same station.